Since Ukraine announced that the production of their best tank, the BM Oplot, would be continuing, I thought it would be a good time to compare it to the best Russian tank in active service, the T-90M. Let's start with the firepower. BM Oplot is armed with a 125mm KBA-3 main gun, which is just renamed Soviet Tu-46M1 gun. It is also armed with a 7.62 coaxial machine gun and a 12.7mm remotely operated heavy machine gun. T-90M is armed with a 125mm Tu-46M5 main gun, as well as a 7.62 coaxial machine gun and a 12.7 remotely operated heavy machine gun. Now, there is one downside of BM Oplot compared to the T-90M. There is no evidence to suggest that Ukrainians gave the tank ability to load longer projectiles, and even if they did, Ukraine and all the countries currently supporting it are not producing any longer APF-SDS projectiles like the Russians do. Russians developed 3 BM-59 and 3 BM-60 APF-SDS projectiles for their modernized tanks, which required some changes to the autoloader in order to fit these projectiles, and these projectiles are being produced. 3 BM-60 was also allegedly spotted in Ukraine. Now, BM Oplot does not have such feature. It is possible to load more modern projectiles than what Ukrainian stockpile of Soviet ammunition would allow. You see, some companies have developed more modern 125mm APF-SDS projectiles that can be loaded and fired by tanks that have not been modernized. Such projectile is, for example, developed by Israeli defense industry and is currently being used by several European countries, including Czech Republic, Serbia and Poland. Now, this projectile is inferior to the Russian one, but it is better than whatever Ukrainians would have access to, so there's that. Now, the fire control system of both tanks is pretty decent. BM Oplot has access to thermals for both gunner's main gun sight and the commander's CITV. Now, some sources state that the thermal used for both sites is a copy of the French Catherine FC, and some state that the thermal imager is the thermal of the second plus generation, but either way, it's a good thermal. T-90M also has thermal for both gunner and commander, but according to Russian sources, it is the third generation thermal, which would be superior to what Ukrainians are using, although not by much. And we know that they actually have such thermals because T-90M tanks keep getting produced, and we sometimes even get footage of such thermals in action. Now, are they using domestic components or are they getting supplies from abroad? I don't want to get into that. All we know is that they do have them. Another upside of T-90M is that both gunner and commander have access to the automatic target tracking, while BM Oplot has automatic lead. What's the difference? Well, automatic target tracking locks onto a thermal signature of a target and follows it wherever it moves, while automatically compensating for the movement. All the gunner has to do is pull the trigger. Automatic lead is a very old system. It is utilized by the gunner tracking a moving target, who would then engage the automatic lead, which would then calculate the movement of the turret and then compensate for such movement. This is a pretty decent system, but in case that the target switches direction or speed during the process, you will have to repeat the process from the start, while that is not the case with the automatic target tracking. Both commanders have access to the battle management system and have the ability to take full control of the firing process from the main gun. Now, while we are at the topic of commanders, there is something I want to mention. In my opinion, the commander station in T-90M is done in a much better way. You see, T-90M, unlike the Soviet and Russian tanks before it, now has a cupola with 360-degree view periscopes, including the front. The image from the CITV is fed into the monitor on the turret wall in front of the commander, next to the monitor for the battle management system, so he can keep track of both monitors at the same time. The CITV is placed behind the cupola, which gives him the ability to look around through the periscopes without anything blocking his view. And since the new hatch can be set in different positions, he can observe the battlefield with his naked eyes or binoculars with very good protection. Now, BM Oplot has a sort of a cheaper approach. On BM Oplot, the CITV is placed in front of the commander, like the main gun sight of the gunner, and uses a binocular system for observation. Therefore, the image is not being fed to any monitor, and the commander would have to take his eyes off the CITV to look at the battle management system or vice versa. This wouldn't be such a big issue if he could look around with his eyes, but since the CITV is placed in front of the commander's hatch, he really can't. Not to mention that the cupola remained unchanged from the old T-84, which has the Soviet-style cupola from the T-80UD. This does not provide a good view out of the tank for the commander, especially not when compared to the T-90M. Now, BM Oplot is inferior in those aspects, but now we will get to some parts where it excels. Let's talk about protection. BM Oplot is made on the basis of the T-84, and as such has the same base armor as T-84, except one detail which we will get to in a bit. Now, on top of the T-84 basis is a duplet explosive reactive armor, which provides excellent protection. T-90M is made on the basis of T-90A, but the turrets are not the same. They are all newly built, therefore it is completely unknown what kind of armor is present in the turret of T-90M. The ERA used on T-90M is Relict, which is also used on other Russian tanks like T-80 BVM. The duplet ERA, according to available information, appears to be better at stopping any kind of threats, and Ukrainians were kind enough to publish all test footage of duplet, so we not only have the data, we have visual evidence. On trials, duplet managed to almost completely stop any kind of heat munitions. Although they haven't used anything as powerful as Cornet, it is still a pretty good representation of how effective duplet is. And when they fired the 3BM42 Mango at the target equipped with duplet, it only managed to retain enough penetration to dig in 60mm, which is a massive degradation in the penetration of APF-SES projectiles. Not to mention that the steel walls between each duplet block ensure that there will be no chain detonation, even though duplet is very explosive. So how is duplet this effective? Duplet is made out of several layers of the Ukrainian Noj, or Nij ERA, however you want to call it. Noj is composed of lines of hollow charges placed along the ERA panel, unlike Contact 5 or Relict, which use simple explosive mass to send a steel plate or plates which would affect the incoming threat. Noj sends multiple heat jets to cut the projectile that hit the tank. Now, with several layers of these, it can be very effective, which is exactly what the duplet is. Now, because of this, it is very heavy. It is so heavy that they had to remove the first steel plate of the upper front plate in order to place it there, since it would have made the front of the tank too heavy for the suspension to hold. But in my opinion, it is worth it, since the ERA provides a much better protection, much better than what the steel plate would have offered. Relict is much simpler. It is an explosive sandwich between two steel plates, which are both sent off in opposite directions once the ERA is hit. That is why we see spaces between two ERA plates and why it's spaced away from the hull's upper front plate. Its exact effectiveness is unknown. Some sources give 50% of penetration reduction of APF-SES and 80% for heat, but unlike for duplet, we do not have test footage to confirm such numbers. Now, the roof ERA of T-90M seems to have been modified fairly recently. Roof tiles used to be the same size as the front turret ones, which provides good protection, but has inferior coverage. On some recent videos and on the Russian Victory Day parade, we can see smaller tiles on the roof, which provide much better coverage than the old ones. But these are still Relict, and are not Contact 1 or Contact 5. I know that because of how the plates look. If you take a closer look, you can see that these new tiles have the same dampers and are the same thickness as the previous Relict plates. Contact 1 and Contact 5 have both different shape and do not feature such dampers, because in Contact 5 rubber dampers are inside the ERA box and Contact 1 does not have any. The roof of BM Oplot appears to be covered in Noj roof tiles, which is still decent because both Noj and Relict provide protection against top attack EFPs such as TOW2B. In their tests, Ukrainians claim that Relict does not provide such protection, but the manufacturer of Relict has since come out and stated that Relict does indeed provide such kind of protection, but Contact 5 does not. When it comes to the ERA coverage, they both have slight advantages. At first it might seem that BM Oplot does not have a good coverage on the turret, because on a lot of pictures the area around the mantlet seems to not be covered. But that is because this area is supposed to be covered by Noj elements. This is what the tank is supposed to look like when fully battle ready. In many of those instances they do not put such elements because they are mounted on hinged mounts, which are supposed to move around for the driver to get out. But it's just easier not to put them in the peacetime. So the area around the gun actually is covered by ERA. The upper front plate also has ERA going all the way to the top, but the area around the towing hooks is not covered by ERA. On T-90M, this area does have ERA on it, but unlike BM Oplot, the upper plate is not fully covered by ERA, and the area to the left and the right side of the driver's periscope is not covered. The gun mantlet also has no ERA, but a simple steel gun shield, which is obviously worse than placing actual ERA elements there. Now, both tanks have turret rings exposed. T-90M has a slight remedy for this issue with the anti-heat net, but BM Oplot has nothing of the sorts. Now, another good feature of the T-90M is the fact that it has ERA elements placed in front of the mudguards, covering the full frontal area of the tank with ERA. A lot of tank modernizations and upgrades neglect this area, and just place ERA or composites on the front and the sides, but tracks do not offer good protection, and the hit coming from an angle would penetrate this area, which is the problem for BM Oplot since it has duplet on the side. Its side protection is phenomenal. A lot of threats would be completely unable to penetrate it, even if they hit it directly on the side. But this area remains a weak spot, sadly. Now, both tanks have some precautions when it comes to safety. Both have moved extra ammunition from the tank into the rear turret bustle. Now, this only moves out the ammunition outside of the carousel, but both tanks still retain the Soviet-style carousel outloaders. BM Oplot retains the T-64 style outloader, which is inferior when it comes to the safety, since this outloader has ammunition charges placed vertically. This allows for a slightly faster reload, but has much greater chances of getting hit. Not to mention that armoring it is pretty much impossible. The T-90M has a T-72 style outloader, which has both projectiles and charges placed horizontally, reducing the chances of the carousel getting hit, and unlike the T-64 style one, this one can be armored, and it has always featured a metal plate above it since the first T-72. T-90M allegedly further improves on this protection with the armoring placed on the sides as well. Now, none of this removes the possibility of the catastrophic ammo detonation, but it does reduce the risk of it happening. T-90M also has the interior covered with aramid spall liners, something BM Oplot also lacks. Both tanks have laser warning receivers, which warn the crew when the tank is being lased by a laser rangefinder or a laser guided missile. BM Oplot also has Varta dazzlers, which are a copy of the Stora ones. Now, this system can be useful against old ATGMs, which are possibly still a threat, but against anything modern, these dazzlers are useless, hence why Russians decided to not place them on the T-90M. And now the mobility. BM Oplot is powered by a 6TD2 opposed piston diesel engine, producing 1200 horsepower and 3230 Nm of torque, while T-90M is powered by a V92S2F V-shaped diesel engine, producing 1130 horsepower and 4521 Nm of torque. BM Oplot weighs 51 metric tons, while T-90M weighs 48 metric tons. Now, when it comes to the mobility, both tanks have around 23.5 horsepower per ton, but T-90M's V92S2F engine produces much more torque. This means that the tank will accelerate much faster than BM Oplot will. Ukrainian opposed piston engines have always been weak in that regard, ever since they started to be used on T-64. 6TD2 is an improvement over the original 5TD, but it still has the same issue. So T-90M will accelerate much faster than BM Oplot will, but that is only forward. BM Oplot, unlike T-90M, has a gear reverser. What this does is allows the transmission to be reversed so the forward gears become reverse gears. There is a lever next to the driver which has two modes, forward and reverse. Usually it is in the forward position, but once it's moved to the reverse position, the gears become reverse gears, so the first gear, second gear, third gear become the same in reverse. This allows the tank to move very fast in reverse. Now, apparently not all gears can be used in reverse. Its maximum speed in reverse is 31 km per hour, but still, this is insanely better than T-90M, which retains the same reverse speed as T-90A, which is around 4 km per hour. Absolutely horrible. And we have seen the T-90M tanks having to turn around to retreat or change position in Ukraine, so there is definitely no change done to that. This is a massive plus for the BM Oplot. Being able to reverse out of situation quickly can mean a difference between life and death, and it is truly shameful that Russians have not done anything to remedy this issue, but have instead resulted in even placing ERA on the back of some tanks in order to increase the chances of survival. Now that we have gotten their technical specifications out of the way, what about the availability? Well, as I said at the start of the video, Ukraine will be restarting the production of BM Oplot tanks, but it is not clear where and how they are planning to do it. There was a recent announcement that Rheinmetall will work with the Ukrainian defense industry for production and maintenance of tanks and other armored vehicles. But the location of the facility was not disclosed, nor was it disclosed if the new BM Oplot tanks would be produced with their help. I guess we can only wait and see. As for the T-90M, the production of these tanks appears to have really ramped up since the war started. Every now and again we get news of new batches being delivered. It is not clear how many have actually been produced, but one thing is certain. Definitely more than the amount of BM Oplots Ukraine currently has, which would be 2 or 3 BM Oplot tanks. It is also not clear when the production of the BM Oplot tanks will start. By the time it starts, Russians could make hundreds of T-90M tanks for all we know, but as I said, we should wait and see. For now, both tanks are pretty comparable and both have some advantages and disadvantages over one another. While T-90M has superior firepower, better fire control system and commander station, BM Oplot has a duplet ERA and great reverse speed, which is very important. That would be all. If you like my content, you can support me on Patreon. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.